Does Bo Nix already have a better understanding of Sean Payton's offense before the play is called, during the play call, and then at the line of scrimmage than Russell Wilson did, Henry?
No. No, I mean, it'd be cool. Eventually, hopefully, but no.
At what point do you think it could happen this year?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think, I don't know, there's just so many different ways you could look at it because, first of all, it's going to be a very different offense. Like, you don't put Bo Nix under center as a rookie, I don't think. Like, only in pretty extreme situations, just because that's not what he does, you know? Like, that's not something he's ever done. I think that, you know, maybe when he was dropping back from under center, the drop was a little bit clunky in mini camp, but that's something that you knew when you drafted a guy who, I can't remember the exact numbers. There's some pretty crazy stats, though, about how little he played under center. And on top of that, you know, it's a lot of RPOs. I think you see more quarterback runs with Bo Nix than you do with Russell Wilson, just because you were trying to get Russ to run the real offense, and Bo, you ease him in. So there's a bunch of different tweaks, but I also think, like, the last offense was tweaked to fit Russ, as all offenses are. So which one's even closer to Sean Payton offense, you know? So who has a better grasp of the Sean Payton offense? Well, the Sean Payton offense is always like changing, and it's different things depending on who you are. So there's like it's not always that simple.
That's very fair. And this question on the DNVR Broncos mailbag comes in from Silly Meng, who says, I've been wondering, is how adaptive is the verbiage of Sean Payton's offense? I've read in multiple books, one of the few reasons coaches can't develop young quarterbacks are because their verbiage is complex and long. I asked this specific question because we saw Russell Wilson have some of those issues at the line with Sean's offense, and I think it's a really good question just about how the biggest difference between college and NFL football. In college football, you see a lot of one-word play calls. You see a lot of plays being sent in through SpongeBob and heart emojis that are held up on signs on the side of the offense, where if you hear an NFL play call come in, it's no joke. It is 16 to 25 words long, and it just sounds confusing as hell. Now, if you break it up, it makes sense. Some of it's for the offensive lineman, some of it's for the tight end, some of it's for the protection, some of it's for the alignment, some of it's for the receiver route, some of it's how it's going to block, some of it's a check. And if they see something, what happens after that? So for every position outside of the quarterback, they're not as difficult. Now, I'm not saying they're easy, but they're not as difficult. But for the quarterback, they've got to know all of that. And there's a very famous clip of our friend Chris Sims, who just struggles with it with John Gruden, back to back to back to back, where Gruden just pulls him out. So it's like, what the hell are you doing? You don't know this? And from an outsider's perspective, it's like, yeah, that was confusing as hell. What are you talking about? So my point is that there's massive differences between the college and the NFL game for most colleges and most NFL teams. But that's one of the biggest things that a player has to be able to do to transition outside of college to the NFL. And to our commenter's question, Russell Wilson did struggle with that. Sean Payton had to throw the wristband on Russell Wilson. Sean Payton had to change the way that he sent plays in because Russ was struggling with that. And I don't think Bo is struggling with that. So as crazy as it is to say that Bo is already ahead of Russ in certain aspects of this, I do think Bo is already ahead in aspects. Henry, we saw 5 practices, which is a good sample size, but not a perfect sample size. I never once saw Bo Nix have to go back into the huddle because he couldn't get a play call right. I didn't see him once ever struggle with that. Doesn't mean it didn't happen in other practices we didn't see, or it was an issue more behind the scenes. But I do think that Bo is going to not have an issue with that, where Russ did have an issue with that last year.
Yeah.
And I think that was even a massive reason why there was a counting down of the play clock the year before with Nathaniel Hackett. Everyone dogs Hackett for that. Hackett was late getting the play call in sometimes, but Russ was also very slow at spitting it out in the huddle. And so that combination was about as bad of a combination as you could have in terms of a play caller, signal caller, and then the quarterback relaying that into the huddle.
Yep. And the thing about the play calls is, this is from a story that Mike Triplett wrote for ESPN about Sean Payton and Drew Brees, who explained a lot of this stuff. But you can make the play call as short as you want, because when you say, I mean, for example, like they have a 22 flanker drive. Like when you call that, that's like a route concept. Everybody should know what it is. But this is Sean Payton's example, is if you call 22 flanker drive, halfback burst, then all of a sudden you're just giving more information. Like it's the same play, but you're telling the halfback exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And so that he doesn't have to remember on 22 flanker drive I do this. It's like, oh, this means that I have this. And so then all of a sudden, like, you know, they put some example calls in, like gun flex right, stack 394, dragon smoke, kill turbo sucker right. Like it's really long, and you can cut that down. And the Broncos did cut that down for Russ last year. But by cutting it down, you lose something. Whether it's like the second half after the kill turbo sucker right, that means if you say kill at the line of scrimmage, it goes to turbo sucker right, which is a different play. So you can call those two plays in the huddle and kill it. So you can cut that down, or you can just say, like you can leave the protection out, have the offensive line kind of figure it out, just the base protection.
But so you don't want that. You don't want to have to do just the base.
What you want is to just be able to very clearly explain everybody's job every single time without wasting too much time, or without the quarterback getting confused. But you can kind of put the pressure on the quarterback. You can put the pressure on the whatever other position. You can cut telling the running back what to do because you trust the running back. You can cut saying like whatever. So there's just a lot. But you could also tack something on, like that 22 flanker drive, halfback burst, X go, which means instead of the normal play, we're running the X go. Like that wasn't the base, but instead he's just running the go route. But if you don't trust the quarterback to remember all that, then it is what it is. So Russ wasn't great at that. Bo Nix, again, this is all the stuff that is really hard to learn, and there's no quick way to do it. And he seems like a really, really smart guy. You don't know if that translates. Like it's more similar to learning a different language than it is to just like studying to pass whatever test. And so maybe he has the brain for that, maybe he doesn't. I would imagine the Broncos believe that he does have that, but I know plenty of smart people who aren't good at learning other languages. Like it's just
the Broncos believe that Nix has
it. They do believe. So there's just
believe.
They do believe. But yeah, there's just a lot that goes into it, and you just hope that by the end, and we know that Bo was calling the kill, like pre-snap. We heard it over and over again. Like he never seemed lost out there. Some of the receivers sometimes did seem lost, which make you wonder, like, how was this call? Did they shorten it? Did the receiver hear what he was supposed to do and then not go do it? But the receivers on top of each other a couple times when Bo was out there. So you just don't really know. Russ certainly sets a very low baseline, but you wouldn't expect after 2 months for Bo to already be in front of Russ.
But everything that we've seen, I think
it's all positive.
That exactly, it is all positive. So I understand where you're coming from, and I don't necessarily think that you're like crazy off, because that is a crazy thing to say, that, or it could be a crazy thing to say that a rookie is already ahead of a 12-year vet with these things. But because I think what you said was the baseline was so low for Russ with calling the plays. But then also the protections at the line of scrimmage. In the 5 practices we saw, Bo was calling protections. He was identifying defensive keys, and that was something that was so refreshing to me, that they did not trust Russ with that. Sean did not trust Russ with that, and that was another big issue with the offense. That was another reason why Sean just thought he needed something else at that quarterback position. Even though there was 26 touchdowns to only 8 interceptions, he needed a lot more from that position, and he believes Bo can do that, and I wouldn't be surprised that if by the end of this year, maybe that's kind of the more fair way to say it, by the end of this year, Bo is going to be light years ahead of Russ in those respects, which is huge. The other question coming in from our friend says, for new fans or fans that are trying to gain a deeper sense of the game, what is the Broncos' current base defense? Another question, so what is the current Broncos base defense, Henry?
So it's the base defense is 3-4, but base defense doesn't mean what it sounds like. Like that's just what you go to when you need to go heavy, is what it's turned into in the NFL. Basically, everybody's base defense is just a nickel defense now. Like that's what you're playing 60% of the time. A lot of teams, including the Bills, or I guess I should say the Bills are kind of at the forefront of this. They don't care what you line up in. They're running their nickel defense. Like if you go heavy, they're still in nickel. And you see even more of that than you see like nobody's sticking in their base defense, which is a 3-4, 4-3, 95% of the time when another team goes lighter. So that's more of just like your change up. Every team 60% of the time at a baseline is running nickel. But technically their base is like the 3-4 when people say, what is the base?
Yeah, and then so people might say, well, what is a 3-4? The first number is how many defensive linemen you have. So traditionally how to think about this is how many people have their hands on the ground before the play starts. So 3 big boys and then 4 linebackers, but it's not 4 linebackers that are all behind the defensive line. You likely have 2 inside linebackers, 2 outside linebackers. So the 2 outside linebackers are next to the 3 defensive linemen on the line of scrimmage, and you have your 2 traditional inside linebackers behind those guys. So in a 3-4, traditionally, typically, you have 5 guys down on the line of scrimmage. Now, the 4-3 is 4, meaning 4 guys on the defensive line. Those 4 are all defensive linemen, all have the hands in the ground, but typically the 2 on the outside aren't as big as the 2 on the inside, and it's a different body type that you're looking for. And then the 3 behind it are 3 linebackers, but they're more so the 3 inside linebackers that you have in the 3-4. They're closer to that. Now, nickel, Henry, what is nickel? When you say nickel.
Nickel means 5 defensive backs.
Yep.
So then, nickel, 5 cents.
Yep.
5 defensive backs. Dime
must be 10 defensive backs.
6. Yeah. Doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
And then wait. So then quarter is 7, and then dollar would be 8. So 8 with the 3 guys.
Yep.
Dollar isn't used as much.
No,
people don't hear about it.
It's not used as much. But to your point, and that's just obviously explaining kind of defenses in its very basic form. But I do think that that's a great question to bring up. And I think it's a great point that Henry, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, base defense was so crucial because that is what teams use.
Yeah.
They were like, this is our base defense. We're using it all the time unless it's 3rd and 20. Then we'll bring an extra, secondary member onto the field here. Now, you're right. Teams still do have base defenses, but for the most part, every team is in nickel way more than not because it's not a passing league. And so you don't need as many big guys on the field as much. And an interesting thing about this defense, Henry, is they haven't said that they're switching from a 3-4 to a 4-3, but we're going to see a lot of 4-3 out there this year. And when I say a lot, I mean like a lot for a team that doesn't run a 4-3 because Jonathan Franklin Myers is a guy who really is a 4-3 defensive end. Now, he's going to be a 3-4 defensive lineman, so they might play him more at that outside linebacker spot, which would then essentially just make the defense a 4-3 defense then. And I also think one of the things the Broncos are really missing from a traditional 3-4 defense, traditionally in a 3-4 defense, you have a massive nose tackle. So you have defensive linemen and then a massive nose tackle. Broncos don't really have that. DJ Jones at his best as a defensive lineman, not a massive nose tackle. Malcolm Roach, exact same profile as DJ Jones. And then obviously Zach Allen's a defensive lineman, definitely not a nose tackle. And same with Jonathan Franklin Myers. He's at most a defensive lineman, not a nose tackle. So the Broncos don't really have that. And if you don't have that, then your just personnel would more so align with a 4-3 defense because in a 4-3 defense, you don't necessarily have one massive nose tackle.
Yeah, so that's how the 3-4 started was you do the nose tackle, but then you get into the over fronts and the under fronts, and that's when you get into the real you need Todd to get into all the details there. But then they're kind of 2 different systems with either your 2 gapping system or 1 gapping system, and so let's see. The base 3-4, the original 3-4, was 2 gap. So you have the nose tackle, which means he's playing both the A gaps. So you sit there and you read, and then based on where the run goes, your responsibility is to not let anybody through either of those, and you kind of control the offensive lineman. Once you start switching to the over front, where you shift over toward the strong side, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I always need to brush up on these ones. This is what I'm not good at. But then all of a sudden it's different. Then the Patriots kind of revolutionized it to the gap and a half, where you say okay, your job is the gap to your left, and you're half responsible for the gap on your right. Meanwhile, there's a guy over there whose gap is the gap on the right plus the half, and so it's all changed and changed and changed.
Who
So
did the Patriots have?
What?
Who did the Patriots have on their defensive line?
Oh,
well, they had Bill Belichick, but they also had Vince Wilfork.
Yep. So that was the initial before they.
big boy.
And then he leaves, and that's when they kind of transition to the gap in the half, which was kind of revolutionary. And so that whole second half of the Patriots dynasty, that defense was all about like the hybrid players with like the Jamie Collins and all that.
Yep.
And so there are a bunch of things that are really simple about the defenses, but then it just gets very, very, very complicated. But the point is that I want to make is that the Broncos are now shifting to more of a one gap system, where instead of having like big guys up front who just eat up blockers, maybe even push them back a little bit, but mostly just like keep your hands free, get to the outside, like clear space to linebackers, they're going to be getting upfield and attacking a little bit more, which is what DJ Jones did in the past when he was so good, because that's what that 49ers front was all about, is you're responsible for not letting anybody through here. And so when this is your only job, you can now just say, like, I'm just going to push this guy aside and play my gap. Like, I'm going to try to get through there, with the idea being you get more tackles for loss, those sorts of things.
And I think we're going to see that happen through more, maybe not traditional 4-3 fronts where all four guys' hands are in the dirt, but they're going to be replacing an edge player or one of their outside linebackers with a Jonathan Franklin Myers. He's not going to be an outside linebacker, but occasionally they're going to make it where there are four quote-unquote defensive linemen on the field.
And you'll see that mostly in the nickel. So you won't see that so much on the 3-4. You'll see it with the nickel front, where a lot of the time what you do is you play your two interior defensive linemen. Those could be any sort of player, really. And then outsides, a lot of the time those are outside linebackers. But the bigger type, like that's where Bradley Chubb was really at his best, because you didn't need to worry about dropping him out in coverage.
Yep.
You just let him play forward. That's where Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa, like those guys are really good. When you start putting a Nick Bonito there, all of a sudden you're concerned about him getting pushed back, because your assignment changes a little bit in a 4-man front versus the 5-man front in the 3-4. When you start putting a John Franklin Myers playing that defensive end spot instead of having a Nick Bonito playing that defensive end spot, you're better against the run. So they added more versatility up front, which means they can do more different things. They can play guys where they're at their best, is something that they've pointed out. They know where they want DJ Jones and where they want Zach Allen, weren't necessarily able to put him there. So they added, and really Malcolm Roach is like that too. Like, not so much defensive end, but he did play some defensive end in New Orleans, played some nose tackle, played some defensive tackle. And so you could kind of shift guys around. And it's a lot easier to say, like, okay, you ask guys to do what they're good at doing. With Marvin Mims, it's very simple. You run him downfield, or you give him a little screen. You don't ask him to do too much in the intermediate just because he doesn't have that route tree. It's very easy to explain that with receivers or running backs. Like Jaleel McLaughlin, between the tackles, not so good. Outside tackles, good. Or but with defensive line, it gets more complicated. But that is a spot where you want to use guys where they're best, and they think they've added the versatility to do that.
Yep, exactly. And that's what this is on Vance Joseph now. Use that versatility to your advantage. And while the Broncos do play a 3-4, technically you're going to see just a lot of other things. Probably, actually, you're going to see the 3-4 less than you see the nickel. Not just for the Broncos, but for pretty much every team. All right, let's get out of here on this one. Coming in from Broncos Only, who says, I love summer vacation season because it means football season is right around the corner. As for the summer travel itself, I'd trade it all for some more touchdowns, making DNVR the most listened to podcast from the avenue of the Baobabs. Broncos Only. Cheers. You know what the avenue of the Baobabs is?
I have no idea.
It's a real place. It is a national forest in... No, you still don't know? No idea?
I Googled it.
Madagascar, which is Africa. Insane. It's the ones where the trees are like massive stumps that get skinnier as they go up, and then it's like just a few branches on top. That is incredible. That is way cool. We're the most listened to podcast now in Madagascar, as well as Sri Lanka. Shout out to the islands.
Shout out to Sri Lankans.
Who knew we were such an island podcast?
Who knew?
Well, have a great vacation in the national forest in Madagascar, our friend Broncos Only. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to leave your question, go to thednvr.com, put it on any of our podcasts, specifically the mailbag one, and we will answer them on next week's mailbag.